Okay. Okay, so if anybody would like to start us and read, I don't know, like, 5 verses or so, and then we'll just continue around the room, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. When Jesus finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. So he went in and sat down to eat. The Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus had not washed before eating. So the Lord said to him, "Now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of your cup and plate, but inside you are full of violence and evil. Fools, did not God, who made the outside, also make the inside? But give what is in your cups and plates to the poor, and everything will be ritually clean for you."
How terrible for you, Pharisees! You give to God 1/10 of the seasoning herbs, such as mint and rue, and all other herbs, but you neglect justice and love for God. These you should practice without neglecting the others. How terrible for you, Pharisees! You love the reserved seats in the synagogues and to be greeted with respect to the marketplaces. How terrible for you! You are like unmarked graves, which people walk on without knowing it.
Somebody like to pick up there?
Teacher, said an expert in religious law, you have insulted us too, in what you just said. Yes, said Jesus, what sorrow also awaits you experts in religious law, for you crush people with unbearable religious demands, and you never lift a finger to ease the burden. What sorrow awaits you, for you build monuments for the prophets and your own ancestors killed long ago. But in fact, you stand as witnesses who agree with what your ancestors did. They killed the prophets, and you join in their crime by building the monuments. This is what God in his wisdom said about you. I will send prophets and apostles to them, but they will kill some and prosecute the others.
And somebody like to finish up for us?
So you who live now will be punished for the deaths of all the prophets who were killed since the beginning of the world, from the killing of Abel to the killing of Zechariah, who died between the altar and the temple. Yes, I tell you that you who are alive now will be punished for them all. How terrible for you, experts on the law! You have taken away the key to learning about God. You yourselves would not learn, and you stopped others from learning too. When Jesus left, teachers of the law and the Pharisees began to give him trouble, asking him questions about many things.
And then we had 3 more verses in chapter 12.
As thousands of people crowded together so that they, stepping on each other, Jesus said first to his disciples, "Be on guard against the yeast of the Pharisees. I mean, their hypocrisy, however, is covered up with an uncovered, and every secret will be made known. So then, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in broad daylight, and whatever you have whispered in private in a closed room will be shouted from the housetops."
Okay, so our premise of our series is we hear Jesus died for your sins, and what does that even mean? And so we're trying to address why did Jesus die? So it becomes this sort of with the help of a friend of mine, we came up with the catchy titles. We're going to call it Dead Man Walking. And so here we are. Jesus, boy, he's really stepped in at this time, hasn't he? We don't hear about this passage a whole lot, but here we are. as we're getting into this particular passage, what are maybe some questions that you know, having just heard this, what are maybe some questions that are burning in your mind about this whole thing? Where do you want to go with this? Anything in particular you're curious about? Yeah, go ahead. You're sitting on your hands over there. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I think about in in this passage is Jesus was invited to dinner, and then he rips into the host.
And he does.
And it's not, the kind and gentle and all loving Jesus that we, we all think of when we think of Jesus. That's the first thing that hits me is like, what is he doing? He's been invited to enjoy dinner with, a pretty important person if it's a Pharisee, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why is he like being so rude? Those are big things.
Well, I think one of the reasons he's being so rude is the Pharisees in them are filthy, and they're taking away from the people. They're not teaching people God's word. You know.
Yeah. So they started it.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. When Jesus came down to note, it ain't happening.
How does that make you feel? To think of, this person that preaches so much love and compassion and acceptance gets invited to a meal and is like the worst house guest ever.
You should have declined.
Well, he's certainly doing it on, knowing what he's doing. And wise man asked me, why did he get invited to that? Why did he get invited to dinner at this Pharisee's house?
I believe they were looking for a reason to arrest him and kill him.
And so he wasn't ignorant of the reason that he was there, right? I think this is all subtext. It's not what we're discussing, what he says, but he knew when he got invited why he got invited, right? And he wasn't going to back down from that. Is that what you're saying, Crystal? Like,
yeah, he can't get arrested for words. That's the one thing. It can't happen. But they were trying to, at the end there, they were trying to spit at him to say something that was blasphemy or treacherous or anything that they could arrest him on.
right.
But speaking the way he did, they couldn't do nothing about it.
Of course, they weren't too happy.
No.
Yeah.
They weren't real happy at all. And they're going to get even.
Yeah.
Yep.
But Jesus knew what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I really think he knew what he was doing there.
Yeah, he knew when he accepted what he was getting into.
Yeah.
And I think had they not started it, and that I really meant that, like they kind of, he knew right away when they were like, aren't you going to wash your hands?
Right. Yep.
Now we don't know for sure what time of day this was. Some scholars will say, "Oh, this was the main meal of the day." That's what makes this a really big deal. Other scholars are like, no, probably not, because just of the gathering that was outside. This is possibly earlier in the day. People in that day typically, Jewish families in that day, they typically ate twice a day. They'd have a rather modest breakfast, kind of at a brunch time, you might call it. And then they would have a bigger meal later in the day, after the heat of the day, like maybe 3 o'clock or later in the day. So we don't really know for sure. what time it was. We find out, right, Jesus doesn't ceremonially wash before the meal. And then what's Jesus say to them about that when he gets called out on it right away?
In a way, he's calling them hypocrites because
Mm-hmm.
they're washing everything that inside of them, saying that they're dirty, they're filthy, they're wicked.
Mm-hmm. How many insults can we count that Jesus lobbed out?
Every single
Well, you.
Let's see. Now, our versions are going to be a little bit different here. So, what would be? Let's see. So, what do you think? What's the first insult? Do you think?
When he told them about washing their hands, being filthy inside.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I suppose jumping right to saying "you fools."
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's an example.
Yeah, that's-
Okay.
Well, right, before that, they told them full of greed and wickedness. That's kind of heavy too.
Yeah. What's another insult?
You like the seats of honor in the synagogue.
Oh, okay. Yep. All right. Seats of honor. Takes him to task for that. What's another one?
Tithing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tithing. Yeah, and that's pretty high. No, that's pretty early on, right? I mean, he goes from okay, the outside of your cup is clean, but the inside you're filthy, and then he goes right to the tithing. So and a word on that. So he makes a big deal out of how the Pharisees make a big deal out of making sure that they tithe their herbs. And how minor would that be? Herbs? Seriously? And in some translations, he actually accuses them of actually counting the stems of the herbs as part of their tithe. Okay? I mean, this is how cheap he's accusing them of being. And in that day, it would have been common for everybody to have their own little plot of ground that they planted whatever on. And herbs certainly would have been part of it. Okay. So, yeah, so that's, I think that's really interesting that he gives it right to him on that about how cheap they're being. See, the bit about the almsgiving, if your translation happens to say that, the giving to the poor, is like one of the most basic of the Jewish tenets. You are responsible for the poor. That's if you're a Jew, that's part of your reason for existence. And so giving alms is a really important thing. And the giving of the alms. Well, I mean, why is that important?
They
Your
didn't
thoughts?
have Social Security, so I mean, it was part of your job as being part of the community to take care of the less fortunate.
Mhm. Yeah. And what are you showing when you're giving your alms? Like, what character traits are you displaying?
Compassion and generosity.
Compassion, generosity,
Love.
kindness. Yeah.
Acceptance.
hmm Yeah, because you're not blaming the poor for being poor. Like, you know, yeah. So right. So from the top of the batting order here, he's he's showing how petty the they're being. Okay, what are some other insults that we're seeing?
When he says that they're like hidden graves, it's calling them and saying, well, if you touch a grave, you become unclean. I think, if I remember right, 7 days unclean. I'm spiritually clean.
Mm-hmm.
That's a definite hit. You know, if you step on a grave, you're spiritually unclean.
Mm-hmm.
And being hidden, you don't know.
Right.
So yeah, it's a big hit for him.
Yeah. Some passages might use the term unmarked grave. Some might say whitewashed tombs. Let's do a little East versus West comparison here. What what would be a typical habit in the West when visiting a cemetery? Let's just list off some behaviors that we exhibit when we're in the cemetery.
Bring flowers.
Okay, bring flowers, thank you. Praying, okay.
And solemn.
But yeah.
Quiet.
Okay, so
Quiet.
solemnity for the
Yeah.
space, okay, respect for the space,
Crying. Mourning.
Dirty headstone, and just.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cleaning out the stone, okay, so there's something similar that's very similar east and west right there, okay, the cleaning of the headstone, all right.
Kevin said crying, I think.
Oh, crying, that no matter,
Yeah.
mourning, no matter how far in the past the event was, exactly. What about where are we physically, typically in that space? Now, I realize if you're going to clean a headstone, you have to approach the grave and be pretty, obviously you're in an intimate space at that moment. But otherwise, where are you in relation to the grave itself and other people's graves that are there, whether you know them or not? How do we typically behave?
Well, we're in front. We're not on where they're buried.
Yes.
We're in front of the headstone looking
At the
that
foot.
way. Yes. Yeah. We're not walking on where they were in the ground.
Exactly. Right. We really have something about that, don't we?
Yes.
We still try to observe that, we're not just casually tramping back and forth over top of somebody's grave. Very deep-seated thing that we do there. I'm not sure where that comes from. We would learn it from our parents, certainly, but that's a pretty typical, a very typical thing of showing respect is not. And what's an insult that we might use when we're talking about, or if you hear someone talked about in a negative sense after they're dead? What's said about that person? Let's see if you can figure out where I'm going with that comment. There's a saying.
Are you talking about rolling over in your grave?
Well, not rolling over in your grave, but there's another one. Bill, you were going to say something.
Actually, I was going to say the same thing.
Oh, okay. All right.
Dead and buried?
Stomping on their.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How many times? Somebody's trying to
do that.
Yeah.
6 feet under.
How many times that I don't mean to speak ill of the dead, but then they'll go on and say, well, when insults come in when somebody says, well, it's not like I'm dancing on the grave or anything, but
Right. Or 6 feet under. I mean, that's another one that.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have a bunch of euphemisms that we kind of toss out there when we're speaking of the dead, either for ill or we have ways that we behave that are respectful regarding the dead. So let's connect this. Let's connect this bit with the whitewashed tombs. So another thing that would have happened in the I'm not sure how long past the first century this went on. I don't know if it is still done in Jewish culture, but it would have been burials sometimes were done a little bit more randomly than what we see now. Now you drive by a place and that's a cemetery. There's probably a fence or there's a gate or there's an entrance, there's a sign. It's a cemetery. And in the Middle East, that's common now too. You can see, where there is a cemetery. But that wasn't always the case. There might have been areas where they would tend to bury people, but it wouldn't always necessarily be obvious. And so periodically, I'm not sure how long it would take before they would go out and do this again. They would go out and whitewash the tombs, literally, so that it was obvious to passersby that that was a burial place.
So was that like what Crystal was saying, that you could avoid it and stay clean?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So you knew to avoid that place and you could remain ceremonially clean. So what's the accusation then from Jesus when he's talking about, but let's revisit that again for a moment. When he's talking about the whitewashed tombs or the unmarked graves or however you put it in the version that you're reading, what's Jesus's accusation? What's his insult at this point again? And I think, Crystal, you did say it, but I'm just going to ask us to repeat it.
So they're making people unclean because they're hidden graves? Is that
Unmarked graves, yeah.
Well,
He's accusing them of being filthy.
but affecting others?
Well,
You
affecting
are
others,
like
yes.
graves which are not seen, and the men who walk over them are not aware of them.
okay. So what's he saying there?
Is he saying the Pharisees are corrupting everyone in contact with them
Yeah.
because of their rottenness, their spiritual rottenness?
Bill gets the gold star for that's what we. I guess the reactions. Is there a gold star reaction? I don't know. Let's see if we're yeah. That by the Pharisees' behavior, they conceal their true character, and they're causing other people to sin because the Pharisees, they're these authorities, right? They're scholars in their religious writings, and people are listening to what they have to say, and they're taking them down the wrong path with their behavior. Yeah, very good. Yeah, he's accusing them of being, slick. Right? I mean, what's the expression maybe that we use after we've been around somebody that we're like, we find them to be we're just uncomfortable having been in their presence. What do you say we need to do after we've been in somebody's presence like that?
Wash up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, don't we? Yeah, it's like, oh, yeah, shower. Yeah. It's like, might not just be because of how deep the pool was, Yeah. So, yeah, Jesus he's kind of insulting them that way. So, yeah, you just shower after being around you guys, This whole whitewash comment. Yeah. Why? Did we go through all the insults yet? I don't think we did. I got stuck on number 2 or 3, didn't I? Okay, sorry. Yeah, let's keep on going.
Yeah, I mean, it's. But yeah, there are more.
But he didn't quit. I mean,
Yeah, he couldn't stop once he got started.
the guy was on a roll.
He goes on to pretty much tell them in the next verse or two that they don't lift a finger, for anybody else or take advantage, and they do what's good for them, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's the whole bit about when, like in verse 45, one of the lawyers answers him, teaches you when you say these things, you insult us too. Like, wah, And yeah, then that leads into what he says about not lifting your finger. Because then in this particular passage, anyway, it's in this translation, the NRSV says, "Yeah, whoa, also you lawyers, we love to gang up on lawyers."
Anybody else cares to see it?
So it wasn't just obviously it wasn't just Pharisees who were scholars of the law. There's also lawyers that are in the presence of this gathering here. And so what would be the thing with like someone that's interpreting the law? Like what's their responsibility?
Lawyers.
Okay, the lawyers, but what's their responsibility in that interpretation or in their job of interpretation?
They have to stand up for victims as well as,
Yeah, how many times, Mike, they should be standing up for a victim. And now here's Jesus saying, you don't even lift your finger, for this person that's the victim. Because where did the people go for justice back in that day? Anybody know? It wasn't a courthouse.
The well.
The well. It wasn't the well.
Was it like a courtyard?
No, because a courtyard. No, it wouldn't have been a courtyard like in a home or the king's courtyard or whatever.
Okay.
No. Any village, any city, you would have a place where you would go to seek your justice from the elders of the town. Where would you go?
Oh, the council, the city, the council of. Oh,
Yeah, there would be a council of elders, yes, who would sit as judges, and here you plead your case. But there was a physical place that you would go to. Anybody know? Nobody knows? Okay. You would go to the village gate. And that's where you would hear your case. Who else might you find hanging out at the village gate? Or the city gate, as it were?
lawyers.
Who? I'm sorry?
I said lawyers, maybe.
Oh, the ambulance chasers. No. No, a certain class of people.
People who aren't allowed in.
Okay.
Well, aren't welcome or.
Yeah, beggars.
Protesters.
Yes.
Peasants, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Your bottom rung of the social ladder is who would be typically found at the gate. And so, that could be, Jesus is kind of getting a twofer on this insult here. You're supposed to be taking care of these victims, and yet when you do waddle on over to the village gate, you're not taking care of who you find in there.
Well, yeah. I think there's a lot of irony to that too, Jack, because the beginning of this chapter, it talks about the hypocrisy. I mean, lawyers nowadays, and I would imagine back then, the Hippocratic oath to do no harm. I mean, that's exactly what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely. I think we're definitely getting a flavor of that here, aren't we? And how justifiable is Jesus's rancor at this meal? Who could digest their food after a gathering like that? Oh my gosh. So we have Jesus moving on to some ancient history. He brings up treatment of the dead prophets. What's he have to say about that?
You celebrate you build tombs to them, but then, you something about your fathers who killed them.
Yes.
Yeah, so I got a flavor there of why are they building the tombs? Is it to honor the prophets or to honor their ancestors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It kind of spoke. He kind of goes there, right?
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the cemetery image again. So, especially if you think of really, even here in Jackson Township, tiny place like this, what's the difference in the headstones between well, no, I'm not going to say the 2000s because we saw a big shift again in the 2000s. But let's just consider the kind of monuments you might have seen in the latter part of the 20th century compared to monuments you would have seen much earlier in the 20th century or the late 18th century. What can you think of?
They would be huge stones, maybe like something that was like the Washington Monument, not that big.
Like obelisks.
Would have,
yeah,
and you would have the family name on that, and all the members of the family would be.
Yeah. And what kind of family would it take to afford something like that?
Wealthy.
Right. Can we see a comparison between what Jesus is talking about with building tombs and the monuments that I'm trying to reference from, say, the 1800s or whenever?
And there's chat if you want. Kevin.
Oh, okay, all right.
But
oh yeah, thank you, Kevin. Yes, Jesus strengthens his argument about the hypocrisy of the situation. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah,
Going back a couple minutes from what you said.
Because what do you think of when you see that kind of monument? Would our thought is any different today from what somebody would have thought 2,000 years ago? Yeah, because if you were from just a common family, you
Didn't have that.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. So again, Jesus is taking them to task for your ancestors. your ancestors killed these prophets, and you built this monument to your ancestor, but not to the prophet. Yeah, that's wow. That's saying a ton. Yeah. Yeah, he's saying that the Pharisees, he's taking them to task also for, they don't lament the death of the prophets. It's kind of like they had it coming to them. So instead of the Pharisees lamenting the injustice that was done to a prophet 1,000 years earlier, or 500 years, whatever the time frame was, they pick sides. So where do we see similar hypocritical attitudes or actions today? How do we execute today's prophets? Or are there no prophets anymore?
True prophets?
That's a dangerous question.
Who might be a prophet today?
Well, according to Twitter and all that, perhaps Elon Musk.
Okay, all right. Who else is a prophet?
In the spiritual sense, or in the just
In any sense. In any sense. Well, I'm not saying necessarily any kind of accurate or self-styled prognosticator. No, because there is confusion over that. And there was confusion over that in the ancient times too. Some people thought that, okay, if someone could, they always thought of a prophet as being the person that could foretell the future. And that wasn't necessarily it. The prophet is the person that could identify current behavior, how current behavior is wrong, and this is what that behavior, if you continue it, is going to lead to. That's a prophet.
Our historians.
Our experience as a prophet.
Our historians.
Our historians
like
are prophets.
You know who I mean.
How about a teenage girl from Scandinavia?
Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
Is Greta Thunberg not a prophet? And what is being done to her?
executed via social media.
How is she being executed? Absolutely. She is glorified by some, absolutely vilified by others. Now, how is she vilified by others? And what are some things that are done regarding what she's done that people have used to execute her, so to speak? Any thoughts on that? Any ideas on what is done? Okay, so Greta's job. What is she trying to do?
Save the planet.
Okay, not a big deal. Just only trying to save the planet. That's all the girl's trying to do.
Right.
That's all she's trying to do. All right. So, in her efforts to do that, what has she done to raise awareness of all kinds of things?
Spoken out.
Spoken out. Has she done it from her backyard?
Did she speak to the UN?
Yeah, and how'd she get to the UN? It wasn't a video conference, was it?
She went in person.
She went there in person, right, to the UN. Guess what? She's been vilified because, she had to use all these fossil fuels to get there to do that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So what kind of activist is that? That's just a microcosm of the way she's been treated. We get all this. There's a name for it. Well, how does hypocrisy defend itself? Anybody know? Oh, yeah. Well,
No, I'm just covered up with a blanket. I got cold.
how does hypocrisy defend itself? Anybody know? Got a clever little term.
Usually it's pointing out somebody else's faults.
Okay, exactly. Yeah, you jump
And
on.
that's how I do
Yeah, it's called whataboutism. Whataboutism. Yeah, but what about? Yeah, that's absolutely. That's how hypocrisy defends itself. So we got Greta as one of our prophets. Who else is a prophet? Who else are we executing? Anybody else you can think of?
I can think of one in the sports world. Tony
Oh,
Romo.
okay. All right.
Tony Romo.
Tony Romo.
He's getting slaughtered right now in the media for being too predicting and stuff in game. It's like people are jumping. It's like when they did it to Joe Buck. They're like jumping on. They're hating the hate, just even when they don't. It's just because it's the thing to do. But you talk
I'm
about
going to keep you in the sports world, Kevin. Give me another sports figure that I think that could be a prophet.
Tom Brady.
No, definitely not Tom Brady.
Just kidding.
But a quarterback.
Colin Kaepernick.
Colin Kaepernick.
The guy that died.
Colin Kaepernick.
The kid that died. Well, that died. What was his name? The kid that died on the field, the Buffalo Bills.
Damien. Oh, he did.
Damien.
So he didn't die.
He didn't die though.
Well, he did.
Yeah.
He did tell his life.
He died and came back to life. That's
So, what makes Colin Kaepernick either a sympathetic or unsympathetic character?
Well, he's standing up for what he believes in, but by doing so, he's been shunned by all the owners because of they turned it around. But he's not patriotic because he's not,
Right.
And it has, in my opinion, it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, it cost him his career.
Right.
Yeah, Colin Kaepernick was executed by the sports media, by all media, executed by the ticket-paying public, executed by the owners. You can't tell me 32 owners didn't collude to keep him from being hired by any other team.
And all he did was kneel. The most humble of things you could possibly do.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't get any more humble than kneeling.
Yeah.
Well,
Didn't say a word. That's all he did.
Yeah. Well, that makes me think of too in the sports world, Jack, about even a couple of different things, even with the black, not only like Black Lives Matters out of the sports world, but back to the football world for black coaches, and there's like the Miami coach and a couple others that come out and, were concerned about racism and all of that, and they've just been, the fire's been put to them because they've spoken out.
Right. Yeah, we can. I'm sure we could find any number of people regarding race relations that are prophets that are are executed all the time in public for trying to make a difference. Any other prophets anybody can think of? Those are good ones. Yeah, there's plenty of them. I know it's hard for us probably to think of maybe people in the political world as being like anybody that's in any elected position. I guess I'll put it that way, of being a prophet because of the machinations that it takes to get to a certain position, right? You have to sell your soul to get elected sometimes, right? Depending on what the position is, but certainly people that are living in the private sphere, but have become a public figure just because of what they try to do. Yeah, those are.
What about Martin Luther King? Yeah, he died for it.
Well, I was thinking of him, but he's dead.
Well, yeah, but he made a prophet in his time.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. Was Malcolm X?
Malcolm X. Yep.
Yeah, that's
He's not as popular as Dr. King for a lot of reasons. Does that make him any less of a prophet?
Well, I would say Jesus wasn't real popular. It's just for me, but he was definitely a prophet. That's what he was saying. But yeah, prophets aren't necessarily always popular because of what they say.
Yeah. Well, how do we confront hypocrisy? How easy is that to do?
I think sometimes the truth hurts.
Mm-hmm.
To be truthful
Mm-hmm.
can be hurtful.
Mm-hmm. No matter how gentle you try to be, right? Yeah. Yeah. How much do you value that friendship, or is it family? Oh my gosh, what we have heard about since, I'll just go ahead and say it, since 2016, what we've heard about families that have just absolutely divided because of politics, that there's no longer, they can't gather for a holiday anymore because people won't bury a hatchet long enough to eat.
Abby and I were just talking about that this afternoon. If you got just our little family together, it'd be half and half.
Mm-hmm.
We don't fight. We don't argue and beat each other up. I mean, they're our family. We love them. I think they're nuts, but
yeah, you're not going to be over. You're not going to do that.
I mean, I love my family. They're entitled to believe what they want, wrong as they are.
And I'm glad you're reminded about that.
Meaning, we don't fight in our family
Yeah.
gatherings. I mean, we joke with each other once in a while or something, but
You're right, man. That goes on a lot.
yeah.
Now.
I think people have gotten to the point, in the beginning, there's a big divide, and there still is, largely, but as far as people's relationships, I think we're much more willing to love and care for people that feel differently than us about things like that, because
and we need more of it.
exactly
More of it.
right. How is anything going to ever heal if we're going to let a divide over? I mean, you're not showing each other anything very good that you'd want to follow, or if you don't be loving toward one another. I mean, if you're going to be an asshole, you're going to meet up with another asshole.
Exactly.
So somebody will defend themselves, and then you're just fighting. You muddy each other up and get nowhere.
Exactly.
What's the danger in a democracy of imposing biblical truths on public policy? And as you ponder that, we need to remember our definitions from last year's Epiphany series. Fact. Facts are. Truth is whatever we believe it to be. They are not the same necessarily. So, taking that definition, what is the danger of us in a democracy imposing biblical truths on public policy? Is it a danger?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
So we sit here and we talk about, we take a small part of this book
Mm.
and we can have different interpretations of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we may leave here thinking, oh, we got it. But Pam and I were talking about it on the way home last week. You know, just because we're satisfied with what we came up with doesn't mean that that is the correct one.
Mhm.
You know, there is no correct one.
Mm-hmm.
This was written by historians who had an agenda, just like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not God speaking. It's,
Well,
That's a
in ter-
confusing concept. It
It
is
is.
called the Word of God, and if you
Yes.
don't believe that's the Word of God, somehow you
Yes.
can't, you know, you're not a Christian or
Right.
whatever. And I'm sorry, but there's a lot of people's words in there that have
Yes.
nothing to do with God.
yes.
That, you know, and
And-
this
and
one's
the-
left out, this script is left out, and this is in, and this is over here in that other book, and this gets to be touted as the absolute word of God out of his mouth. This is it.
Yeah.
It's too contradictory, and that's the first thing I learned about that when I was very young and didn't understand everything was it's awful contradictory to be, you know, which part is absolute.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But that's just me, and I'm odd, so forgive me.
I think you're right because of there's been so many interpretations of the different versions of the Bible throughout history, and like putting that towards like the legality part. If you've got something that you believe and it gets into law, then you've left millions of people hanging, that don't believe in it. Somebody's always going to be left in a pickle.
Now I'm going to play
Oh, no, go ahead.
advocate
Good.
for this because our government and Western governments in general, their laws are based on the foundation of the Ten Commandments. Is that not? Am I saying that wrong? Or
America isn't.
It's a popular misconception, I think.
Okay.
We're not.
I mean, while they were informed, certainly, by religious thought,
that's not the case?
it's not really, but that's that's part of the American
Yeah.
myth.
Well, I'm
We're a
thinking back to
Christian
even
nation, and we really aren't.
You know.
Right. And you can, if you amend something 500 times, then it's not the original law anyway.
True.
It sort of seems contradictory though, because the country was founded on the freedom of religion for people, but the very beginning of this country was real religious. I mean, awful to the Indians, to each other, very, very punitive, and that women had no rights. And I mean, it was very rigid, conservative Christian values that were damaging to everybody around them, really. I mean, I've read a lot of books about early, when there was nothing here but New England. And it was pretty rigid Christian stuff. But the fathers that drew up our Constitution and stuff like that was to protect us from religious tyranny, I guess you would say, to dictate that we were going to be this Christian nation or something. And that leaves out anybody who's from another religion. And you can't have this open thing where bring all these people to this country, but they must be converted. That's colonization, isn't it? I don't know. What do I know?
Well, to look at the
That's
a theocracy. If we base, it's not a democracy.
Right.
Yes.
We base our laws totally on
Exactly.
Theocracies don't do real well.
What would be any examples anyone would care to share that you can think of where biblical truths have been imposed and continue to be imposed on public policy?
I can think of one that's been overturned, and that's enslavement of peoples.
Okay.
I mean, that was at one time defended as a biblical truth since that's in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Look at the fight going on with abortion right now.
Very much so. And no matter where a person falls on the abortion argument, we are making assumptions about a nation's belief, for instance. So if there's an argument against it, we are, are we arguing from our point of view as a Christian and imposing our viewpoint on someone who is not a Christian? And so, to me, I see that's where there's a danger. Last night I was watching NewsHour. There was a reporter interviewing a couple different people. One was a doctor who provides women's reproductive health care. The other is a Texas mother. And I thought it was interesting that, I believe I'm quoting this correctly, Texas has the most number of pregnancies out of wedlock, pregnancies by teens out of wedlock in the nation.
Wow.
And they are trying to restrict birth control even more. They had the most restrictive birth control policy in the nation. Pretty simple math, I would think. But apparently it's a great mystery. It's totally a moral failure on somebody else's parents, But anyway, the one mother that was being interviewed, she I witnessed it right away. She immediately went to whataboutism as soon as the reporter put a question to her about, why shouldn't other parents be able to make that decision, or why shouldn't a teen be able to make that decision? I was just astounded at how quickly she just jumped right to it. And so it's a real thing. And if you watch any news at all, I don't care whose news it is, look out for that. Look out for the whataboutism, and you'll find that there is, somebody's trying to bend. It's their truth, okay? It's not. It's rarely factual. It's usually their truth. So yeah. So the abortion debate. That slavery has been mentioned. There's another one. It's a big one. And I used to be, I was like, oh yeah, yep, I see why we have that law. Yep, absolutely. We should.
Environment, climate change.
No, that does not. No, not with climate change. But regarding, and in some states that there's currently a moratorium on it, and other states it's open season again.
Are you talking about like reefer?
The death penalty.
Oh, yeah.
That's a tough one.
That's a tough.
That is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we coming back to the Jesus conversation?
Jesus accuses, if you want to get back to Jesus, it has drifted past 8 o'clock here. I appreciate all the energetic conversation. Jesus accuses the Pharisees of paying so much attention to the letter of the law that they totally miss the spirit of the law. Do we do that in some ways? You know, what happens with, can anybody think of any examples in like any of our national laws that have just gotten so far afield from its original intent to the way it's applied today? Anything come to mind? I'm not necessarily thinking something is right at this very moment either. How about something from the 50s and 60s?
Talking about the marijuana laws?
No, but it is a drug law, I guess you could say, is what I'm thinking of.
Oh.
And it's caused us no small argument in this nation since 2020. They have saved countless lives. It actually eradicated diseases.
Vaccinations.
Vaccines.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You know, laws were passed. Your kids got to be vaccinated to go to school.
So you got your kid vaccinated.
So you got your kid vaccinated, right?
You said, thank you very much for preventing my kid from getting the measles and polio.
Yeah.
And you went and got it. Thank you.
Now today,
and what has happened? What has happened to the spirit of that law? What has happened? Oh my gosh. You're trampling on my rights to be an idiot.
Yeah.
They're being an idiot.
Yeah.
You're trampling on my rights to
I know.
go infect whoever I want.
Well, you talk about whataboutism with that, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, gosh, anything else about not wanting to invite Jesus to dinner?
Yeah.
But he laid them out pretty good. I'll tell you that. That's one of the reasons why he was in for deep trouble.
Oh my gosh. I mean, just, we look at last week, what he violated last week. We look at this week. They already were suspicious of him, right? And
now they're going to get him.
He's a troublemaker.
Yeah.
Their style.
Yeah. Any other comments anybody wants to share? I'm not trying to chase anybody out the door, but we've drifted past 8 o'clock here by a ways, and man, I really appreciate. There's a lot to chew on with this week's reading, and it may be stuff that I'm not certain where this comes up in the lectionary. It might somewhere, but I didn't look that up to try to figure it out. I know I've never preached on this text before that I'm aware of.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough one. Yeah.
Good one for Thanksgiving. Fighting.
Jesus is not going to be like sitting quietly at the family table.
And you could type up a little card for everybody as a little primer for them. So, okay, here, I want you to bring this up. And I want you to bring this up.
Yeah, Uncle Jack and Aunt Ann, you guys get ready.
Nobody would be staying late.
Bill, I'm sorry, I see you're unmuted there. Anything you'd like to share before we take off here?
Yeah, I just had a quick question for the group, and maybe I kind of missed this, but Jesus says, woe to you because you build temples for the prophets, but it was your forefathers who killed them. So you testify that you approve of what your forefathers did. So I guess I'm struggling with, is he saying because they built the tombs, that they're approving of what their forefathers did? Or I guess I'm just not sure exactly what he's saying there.
Anybody want to revisit that?
Because they built monuments to their father,
Yeah.
but their fathers are the ones who killed the prophets.
Did you
So
catch that, Bill?
the way my Bible reads, it says you build tombs for the prophets, he says. And it was your forefathers who killed them. So he's saying that you build the temples for the prophets. Am I reading that wrong?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think, well, the,
He reads that same way.
yeah, it's the, and gosh, we could get into an English lesson here, which I am woefully inadequate to.
Well, but either way, I think it kind of fits because if they're building tombs for the prophets, these big monuments for the prophets, and their ancestors killed these prophets, I take it that if they're building that tomb, it's more to celebrate their ancestors than it is to celebrate the prophet that is supposedly, that's the way I read my interpretation, but
That's the way I see it too.
but I think others say
Yeah,
like what you're
I can,
saying.
yeah,
That's a difficult. I've read that many times, and I think I don't really. It's a tough part, Bill.
Yeah. Yeah. But the explanations that we've just heard are the explanations that I've read in commentaries. And that is that whether or not they're building the tomb to the prophet or the tomb to the ancestor, they still approve of the death. They approve of what their ancestor did. And they're not celebrating the prophets. They're not lamenting the prophets for a wrongful death.
All I see in this one is Civil War statues. Just saying.
Yeah.
I kept thinking of that when I was reading.
Oh my gosh, that's another good one. Oh, that's very good. Oh, we could keep on going with this. How many of you guys want to stay? I don't know. If Penn State can take down Joe Paterno's statue, you can get rid of you can get rid of some Southern generals, I think. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I digress. Thanks for that question, Bill, and I hope we were helpful in answering that. Anything else before it turns midnight?
No, thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that is confusing the way that reads there, and I don't doubt that our English translation definitely lets us down there. I was reading something the other day, and so this would be ancient Greek, and I was just reading something the other day, and the English and it was I think it was in John. And the translator said, yeah, this word's not translated. Yeah, this word's not translated. You know, there was like a list of like 5 words that weren't translated. So they were just making a best guess as to, what something means. And with, the hundreds of thousands of words that are in the Bible, sometimes you got to cut some slack to the translators and to the people that are trying to put stuff into order, they're like, yeah, that sentence means that. Sure. Yeah, we're going to go with that, so. Okay. Well, if it's okay with everybody, unless somebody wants to close, anybody want to close us with prayer? I'll ask that. I should put it that way. I don't presume to be the only one who knows how to pray here. Anyone's welcome to. Seeing no hands in the air. Everybody staring at their feet. Okay. All right. Okay, keep staring at your feet then. All right. Okay, let's pray. God, we just thank you so much that we could have such an energetic conversation this evening, and that we have not shied away from tackling a difficult passage in these ancient words and help us come to new understanding every time that we read these words. Help us put these words to better use, that our character may be revealed to show the love, mercy, and kindness that is the Jesus that we know, and help us to be brave enough to be the Jesus that we see in this passage that we read today. See us all safely to our homes, that we can be together again. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you, everybody.